Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Mental Health Festival 2025. For those of us just joining, my name is Linda, and I'm thrilled to be one of your MCs for the day. At Intellect, we're committed to making mental health care and well-being support accessible for everyone. And our goal is to empower organizations as well as individuals to prioritize employee well-being and create thriving workplaces. We're picking up from the previous session where our leadership team shared an inspiring message on the importance of building sustainable ecosystems of care. And as you can see from our agenda, we have curated an exciting lineup of sessions and workshops for you today, all the way until lunch, covering topics such as RI of mental health support, neurodiversity, to engaging workshops that will really equip you with practical tools you can use in your everyday life. If you have any counterparts based in the US or EMEA, we also have designed three specific sessions for them later in the day, illustrating what real impactful care looks like. Moving on, and before we invite our speaker, a quick, gentle reminder for everybody. Today's session might touch on topics that can be emotionally challenging. Mental health is, of course, deeply personal, and it's okay if we feel overwhelmed at any point. Please don't hesitate to reach out to one of our team members and let them know, and we would really love to be here to support you. And now I'm excited to hear from our keynote speaker, Amanda Anderson, who will be sharing about why we abandon ourselves at work and risk burnout. Amanda is a global HR thought leader and mental health ambassador with deep lived experience of trauma, neurolinguistic programming, and over a decade in the corporate world. Amanda works at the intersection of personal well-being and organizational culture. Her mission is to guide people caring too much for too long back to themselves so that they stop surviving and start showing up whole. I'll let Amanda share a bit more about herself, but before I do so, just a quick note that if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the Q&A chat box just as we go, and we'll get to them towards the end of the session. All right, enough from me. Let's welcome Amanda onto the stage.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it. And good morning to everyone. When people hear that I'm a mental health ambassador, they tend to expect calm, zen, maybe even yoga at sunrise. And I can assure you that is not me. What I am is someone who is willing to challenge the way that we've been talking about burnout, because I believe that we've possibly been focusing in the wrong direction. So before I continue with my presentation, you can just jump on to the Pole EV by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, don't worry if you can't scan it right now. The team will drop the link into the chat directly as well. But I want you to feel free to share your thoughts. Okay, so they told us that burnout was about doing too much. But what if it isn't? What if burnout isn't about doing more, but it's about how we have slowly lost sight of our own needs, one choice at a time? So, for example, not resting when we need to, agreeing to things when our instincts are asking us to set a boundary, or maybe even holding it together outwardly because everyone counts on you being the reliable one or the caretaker or the one that everyone leans on. But what I'm suggesting is that burnout is actually the smoke. It's neglected self-leadership that is the fire. And I think we've learned to have that self-care gap, not because we're weak, but because somewhere along the way, we were taught that our safety and in some ways our employability depended on it. And that to stay safe, we had to trade authenticity for approval. So I'm just going to ask you, and it's not on the QR code, but just have a think. How often do you say yes at work when you really want to say no? And be honest with yourself as well. I think that a lot of the time, people are so used to the habit of doing it that sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it. So I just want to make sure people really have a think and think, how often do I say yes when I really want to say no? Now, we didn't mean to downplay our own needs. We just got good at over functioning and powering through and in some ways keeping the peace. And we got so good at doing that that we forgot that there was another way. And on top of this, because the system applauded our overfunctioning and our powering through with promotions, with praise, with positive performance reviews and perks, we ended up ignoring the unspoken tension that we were feeling or the unmet needs that we had and any inner pressure and superficial comfort. And so now those signs of strain are starting to show because of these behaviors, and we're calling it burnout. But I'm suggesting that we're not burned out because we're careless or because our workplace demands too much. In fact, I think it actually runs deeper than that. I believe we're burned out because somewhere along the way, many of us picked up an unconscious rule that said, if I over deliver, I'll be valued. If I make myself useful, I'll be accepted. And if I disappear just enough, then I'll belong. And it wasn't imposed by our employers. Many of us stepped into overfunctioning ourselves, sometimes with intention and sometimes without even realizing it. And sure, it works for a while. And yes, the world absolutely claps for productivity and reliability and our ability to hold everything together. But the more we take on, the more responsibilities tend to come our way. And that's okay. That's how work naturally expands. But the problem is that we're finding that underneath that applause, which we've often welcomed, is a quiet cost, that the self that we've sidelined and the needs that we've ignored and the pressure that we've normalized. So burnout isn't the cause of the problem, it's the effect. It's the body's signaling that the cause, it's the body's signal that the cause, which is ignoring our own needs, can't last forever. So now we're struggling, right? The company feels the impact and they're now putting initiatives in place, not only to support you, but in turn to also safeguard themselves. And most corporate burnout frameworks treat these symptoms, some of which we've all felt at one time or another. And they are things like workload. There's always too much to do and never enough time. Constantly juggling and always feeling behind. Weak boundaries. We've said saying yes when you really need to say no. Maybe you have other commitments. Running on empty, no matter how much you rest. Living on edge and having a body in overdrive and stressed and anxiety. Starting to become disengaged, losing that passion and motivation. Another framework that treats the symptoms is, mental exhaustion from replaying everything and managing expectations of all possible scenarios. Terrified of losing face and being seen as failing. And being trapped by the feeling of never being enough. So these are all the symptoms that these corporate frameworks try and treat when it comes to burnout. But I'm suggesting that no one really talks about the deeper mechanism underneath these symptoms, the unconscious pattern that drives them all, which is the daily choice to ignore our own needs, our own voice, and our own values. And we do this to stay safe, to feel liked, and to feel relevant. So burnout isn't just about doing too much. It's about forgetting ourselves in the doing. So long before burnout shows up, your nervous system is already running on empty. You're surviving on adrenaline. You're betraying your own needs. So burnout isn't a sudden crash. It's a backlog of unresolved stress and self-betrayal. So the question isn't, why are my people burning out? It's, why are so many people convinced that they have to trade authenticity for approval? So here's the truth about the so-called dream employee. They say yes to everything. They stay late. They absorb everyone else's stress. They rarely push back. They, more often than not, don't complain. And really, they just carry on until they don't. Now, when you give this much of yourself, it's only natural that it gets noticed and then often leveraged. Usually, nobody even intends for it to happen. It's similar to, I guess, agreeing to maybe extra family responsibilities, even when it's stretching you thin because you have your own responsibilities. But when you say no, it feels disrespectful. And then what ultimately happens is your compliance quietly reinforces that expectation. So companies and organizations are usually not acting with ill intent. Most of the time, it just goes unnoticed, or it's praised. You know, wow, what dedication. You worked so many hours on this project. We really appreciate your help. You know, but the truth is, our self-neglect creates patterns. And over time, others come to expect that. Like, why wouldn't they? We've been modeling it all along. And those patterns, they get rewarded as performance. So overwork, silence, and compliance get recognized as high performance. And what's really unhealthy coping, which is this overfunctioning, suppressing needs, ignoring boundaries, silent suffering, it gets framed unintentionally as strengths, as dedication, as resilience, as loyalty. So we also, more often than not, see promotion rate versus peers. We see it in career progression. So those who overfunction and always say yes, and they're always over delivering, they often rise faster. And the catch is that it sends a signal that this self-abandonment equals success, rather than healthy, sustainable contribution, like collaboration or creativity or strategic thinking or consistent impact over time. And we also notice an uptick in recognition for things like staying late or taking on additional responsibilities or always being available, you know, in meetings and on email. And all of those things signal and subtly reward these boundary-less loyalty signs. People who go the extra mile should absolutely be acknowledged. But the recognition needs to focus on what they actually contribute, like Charlie's creativity or the ideas he brought to the project, not just his presence or his effort. So true advancement and acknowledgement should come from valuing what people bring, not just how much they do. So instead of measuring commitment by hours or effort, we've got to try and focus on the impact that someone makes and how they elevate the team or the solutions that they create. Okay, so which behaviors do you think leaders unintentionally reward in your workplace? So if you've got the QR code up, you can start answering the questions. Wow, we've got a very high overfunctioning rate here. So what this tells us is that often, without meaning to, leaders end up rewarding people for overextending themselves and staying silent about what they're struggling with. And while these behaviors might keep things running smoothly in the short term, they do come at a cost. And they come at a cost to the individual, to the team, and ultimately to the organization. So The real question becomes, how do we notice these patterns and start rewarding the behaviors that actually build well-being? Okay, so now we all know the data and the statistics. Companies that actively reward wholeness, they see engagement scores rise by 20% in 6 months. And organizations that prioritize wholeness, they outperform their peers by 15% in engagement and retention. You know, that's the difference between high-performing teams staying versus having them walk out the door. Now, teams may see up to 25% productivity reduction when their high performers are overstretched. And in one consulting firm, Workogenics, their departure of a single key leader caused $500,000 in project delays. So it's not just input, it's not just about output, it's retention. So employees who feel recognized are 45% less likely to leave after 2 years. So engagement and wholeness, they're not just feel-good concepts, they're measurable ROI, right? And we know that. The data proves it. The more companies do for burnout and to help with mental health, they now realize that their employees are performing better. So it's understandable that we think it's up to the company to make it all better. However, I'm suggesting that there are two truths. That burnout is the systemic misaligned incentives plus neglected self-leadership. It is a handshake. Employees need to take accountability of their own self-leadership, and workplaces need to create the conditions where they can speak up long before burnout hits. So how do we do this? How do we ensure that employees feel safe to voice their ideas while leaders foster that safety? Because meaningful dialogue takes both parties. As we know, it takes two hands to clap. So the starting point is leadership. Leadership isn't about pushing harder or setting ultimatums. It's about co-regulating, being the emotional thermostat for your team. You're not the linchpin, but your presence and your influence definitely set the tone. It's about modeling. So leaders who are self-aware, centered, and intentional, they create the conditions for their teams and their organization to thrive. And it's about how you act. Think of it this way. You're not just managing tasks, you're shaping that emotional climate of your organization. Your energy, your boundaries, your self-respect, they set the tone for everyone. So think about it. How am I helping my team manage stress rather than unintentionally increasing it? Where might I be modeling unhealthy patterns without even realizing it? And what is one action that you can take today to signal to your teams and your organization that self-care isn't optional? It's a strategic priority for your organization. So as a leader, the question isn't, why are my people burning out? It's, where am I rewarding overextension? So for example, that email praising someone for staying late on a project instead of highlighting their collaboration, contribution, strategic impact. Where might our success have unknowingly relied on silent struggle? What am I modeling? Self-leadership or self-sacrifice? So this is done through your behaviors, your boundaries, and the energy that you demonstrate every day. And what would we gain if people stopped just surviving and started being able to show up as their whole, full selves? So for leaders, I want you to try and identify one metric or one policy or one norm today, just one, and just adjust it. You don't have to change it entirely. You just want to show that your team, that well-being and wholeness aren't optional. They're essential to performance. So people don't just suddenly ignore their own needs, right? It happens gradually and choice by choice until it becomes normal. So the opportunity and the responsibility is twofold. As leaders, we can change what behaviors and outcomes we reward, and we can model how to show up fully for ourselves. And both of those are essential if we want to move beyond burnout and build sustainable performance. So for employees, I want you to ask yourself, why do you shrink yourself to be accepted? And in my experience, the reason is that over time, we've learned that our needs and our opinions and our boundaries aren't always safe to show. So it's a mix of habits, conditioning, and subtle workplace signals that reward overextension and people pleasing. However, work also becomes the stage where these self-neglecting behaviors can either be healed through self-awareness and setting boundaries and giving yourself permission to care, or hardened through ignoring your own needs, people pleasing, and normalizing overwork. So even if we didn't create these patterns, work makes them more visible, and it's the perfect place to start showing up differently. So you want to take ownership of yourself. Notice where you say yes out of fear or habit, not alignment. Identify one boundary that you've been avoiding, or take a small concrete step towards honoring it. Track how you spend your energy. Take your leave when you need it. Define your work hours and stick to them, and communicate these boundaries to your colleagues and your supervisors. Engage in activities that promote physical and mental well-being, such as exercise or meditation or having hobbies outside of work. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, discuss your workload adjustments. Seek guidance. Take time to, assess your work-life balance. Now, we've got proof that it works. As I mentioned before, employees that are allowed to leave on time without penalty have higher engagement. Companies, that reward balance get 20% more engagement in 6 months, and recognized employees are 45% less likely to leave after 2 years. But also, the bigger truth, when we set clear work-life boundaries, we are 40% lower stress. When we have happy, boundary-conscious employees, we're 13% more productive. When we set boundaries, we have better work-life balance. Employees practicing self-care, we're happier, we have a higher self-confidence. And when we spend 2 to 3 hours a week in nature, we have a 20% higher life satisfaction. So when employees take care of themselves, they not only experience less stress and more energy and greater fulfillment, but those benefits then also ripple across the team and the company too, which then drives focus and performance and lasting resilience. So real resilience isn't pushing through, it's holding on to your self-respect under pressure. And burnout recovery isn't about doing less. It's about reclaiming yourself and living like it matters. So what I'm suggesting is that to build a sustainable workforce is when we build an organization and a culture where people know that they don't have to sacrifice themselves to fit in. And the organizations that understand this, they won't just retain talent, they'll unleash it. Because burnout isn't about doing too much. It's about forgetting ourselves. And for years, employees have quietly overfunctioned to belong and to be valued and to survive in workplaces that unintentionally reward this behavior. So companies are not the villains. They're strategic and they're enterprising, and they're making the most of the patterns that we first created ourselves. So the problem, in my opinion, isn't overwork, it's self-betrayal. And the solutions are not just perks and wellness programs. This sustainable performance requires a shared responsibility. Leaders must model boundaries and psychological safety, and employees must also do their part and reclaim their voice and their energy. And only when both sides act can we move beyond burnout to a culture that values wholeness and not just output. So, any questions?
Thank you so much, Amanda. We actually have a lot of questions lined up for you already. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It was a very insightful, very important take on burnout. I'll give everybody a few more seconds to drop their last questions in the Q&A section. In the meantime, I just wanted to point out that we have 2 resources ready for you as well. So at the bottom in your Zoom window, you can go to resources. We have one that's called the Workplace Guide, How to Talk About Mental Health with Your Employees. And the second one is a guide for HR leaders on strategies for HR burnout and workplace well-being. So you can take a look at both of those. But back to you, Amanda. We have some great questions in the Q&A poll. Let
Fantastic.
me read the first one to you. How to better set these boundaries as an individual to stop our own overfunctioning or our self-abandonment.
Yeah, I think the first thing that people need to do is it's a self-awareness piece. You need to start noticing the patterns that you. So what I would do, I create a clock, a 24-hour clock. I sit down and I mark out, okay, this is my commute time, this is my working time, this is my lunch time, this is my fitness time, and so on. And I go around the clock. And that's the first visual moment where I can see where I'm potentially over functioning or overcommitted to something, and I can start to move that balance around the clock a little bit better. And I think once you do that and you have that self-awareness of where you are giving potentially too much of your time, that's when you can start looking at what boundaries you do need to set in the first place. And I think that's often one of the biggest things, because we don't know, how am I going to fit it all in? Well, it's looking at that clock.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It sounds so simple, yet a lot of times we overestimate what can actually fit into that clock. So what a great exercise. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I have another question. Beyond self-leadership or self-betrayal, can you share an example where you supported leaders to realign systematic misalignments?
So I'm currently working with a client to create a global roadmap on this exact thing. And what we're doing is, instead of offering initiatives and perks without any real time input from employees about where they're struggling and that self-abandonment piece, when you do that, you end up creating initiatives that don't actually benefit the individuals. So what we're currently doing with one of my clients is we're having real-time, day-to-day logins that are anonymous, that flag how people are traveling with regard to psychological safety, with regard to those self-leadership pieces, burnout, overfunctioning, etc. And then from those real-time, day-to-day anonymous answers, we're then able to provide them with direct tools that answer those particular issues. So if, for example, a particular department or region or cohort keeps saying that they're overworked, under-resourced, etc., we will then use that information and create real-time initiatives, resources, webinars, podcasts, learnings, training, etc., in order to directly answer that question or that issue.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So you're really diving into the real daily life that's happening and going from there to decide which tools to choose and how to work with the leaders. Thank you so much.
No
Okay, we
problem.
have time for one last question. I thought this one was quite interesting. It's for those of us who are currently looking for a new job. From an individual standpoint, in the process of seeking new employment, how do I gauge a workplace well-being? What kind of questions should I ask in the interview?
Oh, that's very good. Um, I'm going to be I'm going to be honest. My first thought is that what I would be doing is trying to do research outside of the organization as to the well-being of the organization, because I think, in my experience, a lot of organizations do culture surveys and pulse surveys and feedback, but a lot of employees don't feel comfortable answering those honestly, even though they're told that it's anonymous. So I think that asking a company or asking its employees directly how the company handles well-being and mental health, you are always going to get a skewed answer one way or another. So I think the trick is to, check out reviews of the company, Glassdoor. I don't know if that's something that's in Asia. Other options for looking out, for real, true information would be my first port of call. As far as questions go, I don't think it would be questions about perks or initiatives, it would be the day-to-day. I'd probably give them a scenario and say, if I found myself in a situation where, God forbid, I had to take my pet for emergency surgery, what's the situation around that, and just gauge their response as to whether it's sort of, a human response to having to set a boundary, or if it's, a corporate response to what you're supposed to deliver in your role. So yeah, I think unfortunately there are nuances, but I think that, yeah, my go-to would be an external source first, if I could.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda. I really loved your thoughtful answers to all of our questions. And thank you so much to the audience as well for these great questions and for your answers to the polls earlier as well. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. If you're looking to rewatch the session, I saw quite a few questions about the recording flying around. The recording will be made available on our events platform and also on the Intellect YouTube channel soon. Please also help us fill out a short survey. It'll appear after this session ends. We would love to take your feedback into account for any future sessions. And our next session is called Morning Reset, Building Blocks for Your Best Life. So it's a perfect transition from today, from our topic just now. It's a guided activity led by my colleague and ICF Master Certified Coach, Ivan, who has more than 3,000 hours of coaching experience. He'll guide us towards what truly matters and how to set our intentions for the day. To join us, you can simply return to the lobby page and click the Join Now button beside the session title. We've dropped the lobby link into the chat as well just now. So thank you so much for being part of this important conversation. And thank you so much again, Amanda, for being here with us today. We'll see
Thank you, and
everybody
thank you
in our
everyone
next
else.
session.